you follow Freemasonry orders before you follow military orders, even though all the astronauts were military. And that's another interesting aspect of this, is the military is in full control of the NASA Apollo program at the time. And they were all military personnel that were involved in that, including the astronauts. NASA had to get those tapes back from the archives. They had to destroy them, because what if, and this actually happened, what if some intrepid scientist or documentary movie producer comes along and says, I want the tapes so as I can access the data to make a really good documentary for you to promote the anniversary? Well, can you imagine the shock of listening back to those tapes and finding out that there's nothing on them?
Welcome back, everybody, to an all-new episode, a special episode of Low Value Mail. It's episode 94 on this February 6th, 2024. Just had some Dr. Pepper Zero. I think Diet Dr. Pepper is better. But we got a special episode. It's not technically our 2-year anniversary. It's kind of more like a chick birthday, to be honest. You know, they're like, it's kind of around, but we're not going to be doing a show on the actual, I looked it up, February 9th, 2022. We did the first ever episode. It's when I got into the call-in game, as you will. So it's close enough. 3 days from now, but there will be no show on February 9th. So it's the 2-year anniversary. I guess I could have done it next week, but I chose this week because I'm just so gosh darn excited. I'm so gosh darn excited because we have, in my opinion, great episode tonight. Great guest. Very pumped. Very pumped. We have joining us Randy Walsh, author of the book, The Apollo Moon Missions, Hiding a Hoax in Plain Sight. It's a very well-reviewed, very high-selling book over on Amazon. He is an author, obviously, of this book. He's as well as a commercial pilot, certified flight instructor in the general aviation industry. He's also Canadian. We actually were chatting before this. We're from the towns right beside each other. What a small world, huh? And we're going to be bringing him on very, very shortly. Before we get started, as always, please like and subscribe. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel, the Low Value Mail channel. If you're listening to this over on Spotify, Apple, whatever, just leave a review, whatever it is. Even a rating. A rating, that's easy, right? You could just leave a rating. That'll help. If you noticed, we've made some minor changes. If you didn't like them, tough beans. But for now, going forward, just the way that YouTube recommends podcasts, and because obviously the goal is to grow this show into a call-in juggernaut, if you will. But anyways, the way that they do is they don't really recommend live streams very well on YouTube for whatever reason. So going forward, I did it last week. It worked out well, all things considering. So going forward, the live streams, shout out to Incitus. I don't even know how to pronounce that. There's just a V where there's supposed to be a U. It's crazy. Anyways, going forward, as mentioned last week, once the live streams are done, they're going to get taken down. They're going to be, the episode is going to be uploaded as its own standalone video. If you are a supporter of the show, a patron, if you will, you'll get a little early access to it. It's nothing crazy. Some people are like, oh, you're in it for the money. I don't make any money on this, okay? Let's just be clear about that. I am definitely not doing this for the money. But anyways, you'll have a little, just as a bonus or something, because for the people who support, you'll get like, you know, I think I'm going to release this is Tuesday night, Thursday morning. It'll be out for everybody to watch, but you'll get early access to it. So that's kind of cool. Also, if you'd like to support the show, patreon.com/lowvaluemail, you can buy one of these nifty channel memberships that you see so many people have in the thing because they're badasses. You can buy one of those, and then you get a wrench, which comes in handy down the line for the after show that we do once a month. And then also you'll just help me eventually get a producer and make the show longer. And then finally, tomorrow night, we have an all-new episode of The Bathhouse. The rootinest, tootinest, ultimatist comedy hang live from the Stand Comedy Club Green Room. We have Toby McMullen from the Are You Garbage podcast. And we have Brett Raybould, who co-hosts a show on SiriusXM with Lisa Ann. So maybe we're going to find out what was going on with all those shenanigans the other day, but maybe not. No promises. I'm rambling, but I'm done rambling. It is the 2-year anniversary. And without further ado, let us bring on Mr. Randy Walsh. One moment, please. Here we go. Ask to unmute. Hold on. One sec. Oh, got to do this. Randy, can you hear me? Hold on.
I can hear you.
Oh, there we go. Here we go. Randy Walsh, how you doing? Welcome to Low Value Mail. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it very much. We have an exciting show, and I appreciate you coming on. So, for people who don't know you, this is I've had a lot of requests. So this is, you might not know the show. It's a call-in show, and the phone lines will be open soon for people who have any questions for you. You've written 3 books titled The Apollo Moon Missions, Hiding a Hoax in Plain Sight. So clearly, and we've had a lot of people request someone come on to discuss this exact topic. So I think you're as qualified as anybody. So first off, tell people a little bit about yourself before we get into things here.
Sure. And just a big hello to you, Danny. Thanks for having me on. And
my pleasure.
It's just very interesting to find out you're my next door neighbor over
I know,
in
right? Right? I know.
Yeah. Great little
what
town.
Are the odds?
Great little town.
What are the odds?
Yeah. So I guess usually what people will ask me first is how I got involved in the Apollo moon missions or the Apollo moon mission hoax. And it actually, it's a kind of an interesting story. It happened about maybe 25 years ago. I had just came in late one night from work and turned on TV, A&E. Just happened to be actually A&E back then was sort of tolerable. Not tolerable now, but it was tolerable then. They had a documentary on there about the Apollo missions, and I wasn't really paying much attention to it. So what happened was just walking around, listening to it, sort of, half listening to it, and then something caught my ear. And then I realized they were talking about Apollo 13. Now, for those of you out there that are not familiar with the Apollo missions, it's 5 decades ago. Apollo 13, according to the official narrative, had an accident on the way to the moon. So it basically blew an oxygen tank, and it disabled the service module engine part of the command module. So they were in, according to the official version, they were in some very serious trouble, so dire straits. So they were actually interviewing the 3 astronauts that were on that mission. And I remember one of the astronauts, and I believe now it was Commander Jim Lovell, who of that mission, they were talking about how they're going to swing around the moon and they were going to use the lunar module's engine to get them back to Earth. Now, they were using the moon as a gravity, sort of a slingshot to get them back to Earth. So, with gravity assist. Now, something struck me when he said this, and it really got my attention. He said how he was talking to his fellow astronaut, making it very clear that whatever you do, when I fire the engines, whatever you do, keep the Earth within a grid pattern on the window. So I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, hold on a second here. You're 250,000 miles from Earth, and you're talking about navigating through visual means. That was really a first red flag for me, because
you're in aviation. Like, are you?
Yeah.
You're in, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is kind of your wheelhouse.
Yeah. So at that time, I was just embarking on a commercial career. So I already had a pretty good background in navigation. And, one would think that on a mission to the moon and back, that you would have some sophisticated computers. Now, they did have computer on board, and we could talk about that later. But basically, this computer was not up to the task of navigating. So they were using, and plus they had to shut the main computer down because they had all moved into the lunar module, which at that time was still attached to the command module. So they were using visual references to navigate 250,000 miles back to Earth. Now, to put this into perspective, if you're like, let's say 0.01 degree off course, you're in serious trouble. You could be thousands of miles off course by the
from
time you
that
return.
from a 250,000 mile distance,
Exactly.
like that
Exactly.
tiny fraction
Exactly.
could be huge.
Exactly.
In what?
Yeah.
In the sense is that they have to, because they would have had to take a specific path to get back.
Exactly. So the way it works is they were sort of technically in an elliptical orbit around the Earth, even though they were at the moon. So it's basically an extended orbit from their track from the Earth to the moon. But what they were talking about is because everything, they were basically, according again, and I emphasize the official narrative, because when I talk about this, people say, "Oh, you believe in the moon missions?" No, I'm talking within the framework of the official narrative. And they were basically rewriting the rules, and they were using visual cues to navigate. Now, the argument back to me has been that, well, they had to navigate through the stars anyway. And that's another issue. And they're sort of half correct in that. But they've been using unmanned missions for years, even back then in the 1960s, that navigated to moon and back with no problem. So I didn't understand at the time, well, why are you using visual cues? Well, again, one would argue, well, because their mainframe computer had broken down, they had to shut that down. See, they had to shut everything down the command module to save energy, because they had to rely on the lunar module. Instead of landing on the moon, now it's still attached to the command module. And they had to use that to navigate back and to get them back. So using visual cues by keeping the Earth within a grid pattern on the lunar module window.
And when you say like a visual cue, you're saying like, let's aim for East Coast of United States kind of thing?
Yeah, basically the whole Earth, keeping the whole Earth within a grid pattern.
Gotcha.
Now, I need to qualify something here. That was actually depicted in Ron Howard's movie Apollo 13. And that's not exactly the way the official version has it. They were actually using a thing called the optics. So they were used, because of the way the spacecraft was aligned at that time, when it was heading back to Earth, they had to use the lunar module optics, which is what they would use if they were descending down to the moon. They'd use that for navigation. And it was through the optics, according to the official version, that they were using to keep the Earth within a grid pattern on the optic part, while Jim Lovell was firing the lunar module engine. Now, think about this for a second. You have to be very, very, very precise. I mean, you have to be precise just flying from, let's say, from here to Texas, from Toronto to Texas. Can you imagine, with their limited fuel capacity at that time? They had limited fuel capacity to start out with, but now they have even less because they're using the lunar module, which is not designed to get them back to Earth. They're using the propellant on a lunar module to get them back. If they're off by as much as I mentioned earlier, 0.01 degrees, they're effectively off course by thousands of miles. They have no means of getting back on track, because it would have, by that time, it would have probably exhausted what propellant they had left, and they're effectively marooned in elliptical Earth orbit for eternity.
Right. Okay, so you're essentially not by, and so are there any parts of it that you do accept because there's obviously a lot of theories as to why this would have been faked, right? This whole thing. So what I guess what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, okay, so for me it was more of it was more of a process. I mean, I didn't just say, oh, the missions were fake when I saw that. That was a red flag. But I never thought much of it after that. I remember thinking at the time, that doesn't seem right. They spent equivalent in today's money about $250 billion on this program. And they're using visual cues to get back to Earth in an emergency. Did they not plan properly for this?
Did they have the technology?
Well, proponents of the missions will tell you, yes, they did. They had the technology, but I would say after my years of research, which culminated in my 2 books, and a third one actually coming out, no, they didn't have the technology. I mean, absolutely not. Now, I want to just mention that it took me several years later before I actually got into the details of these missions. All right. So Apollo 11 was basically the starting point because it was the first mission that supposedly landed on the moon. Right.
Yeah.
But it was Apollo 13 that actually got my attention. And I went from there. And it wasn't until the mid 2000s that I started looking, because there was a lot of information coming out on the internet at that time because it was becoming very popular. It was just becoming more mainstream. And I started looking at some of the videos, and I, of course, looked at all the hoax videos, the conspiracy videos. But I said, no. I got to really dive into this. So it took me several years, but I dove into NASA documents. I started ordering books on the official version. And to my surprise, actually, I found out that most of my information, intriguing information, actually came from official sources. It came from the official narrative. And that's what's really fascinating about this journey, is that the conspiracy books are good, the conspiracy videos are good, but they don't get into the details as much as they should. And I say to people, and you know the old saying, the devil is in the details. And when you actually dive into the official narrative, and you read the manuals that are put out, and you read books that are put out by people who support and promote the Apollo missions, that's where you find the smoking gun.
Right. And so what were these specific things? Because you're going through official NASA, I imagine reports, documents at that point.
Yeah.
So what were the things once you started going through them where you started to kind of...
So there's a million things that we could talk about here. And to say what was the one thing is very difficult to do. But what I can do is I can tell you what I focused on. And for me, I started with the Saturn V rocket and more specifically, the F1 engines within the Saturn V rocket. Now, the F1 engines it's got a bit of a history. It's a very interesting history. The F1 engines to this day are still talked about as the most powerful liquid fueled engines ever made. They work perfectly during the Apollo missions, and after that have never been used again. And when I look deeper into the subject of the F1 engines, and without the F1 engines, and I want to emphasize this, without the F1 engines, you would have had no Apollo moon landings, because the F1 engines needed to produce the power in order to launch the 46-ton payload into orbit, right? And that payload includes the command module, the service module, the lunar module. You have to, you need that kind of thrust to get that up into orbit. That's just to get it into orbit. Right. And if they're not producing, the F1 engines are not producing the power that is needed, if it's off slightly, it doesn't reach low Earth orbit, and you cannot have an Apollo moon landing. So that's where my starting point was, the F1 engines. And what I found out is that a lot of the data was fraudulent over the years. Now, there's an individual who worked for Rocketdyne. Rocketdyne was the corporation that built the F1 engines, and he worked for Rocketdyne between 1958 and 1963. Now, his name is Bill Casing. And a lot of listeners tonight hearing this will know exactly who I'm talking about. And Bill Casing is being very much maligned in the last several decades, because he was the first one in 1977 to come out and write a book exposing the Apollo moon missions. Now, some of the things in that book he got wrong, but his basic premise was right, and I believe it still holds up to this day.
And he was the very first person who cast some doubt on the entire thing?
Yeah, I wouldn't say cast doubt. I think there was a few that did cast doubt, but he was the first one to publish a book on it.
Okay.
And his premise is, actually, as I mentioned earlier, he worked for Rocketdyne, and he was directly involved in cataloging the data output for the F1 engines at that time. So Rocketdyne had hired him as a data analyst, and a lot of people call him a paper pusher, but he was actually qualified. I mean, why would Rocketdyne hire him to analyze data on experimental engines that they were working on at the time, and if he wasn't qualified? Right. So obviously he was qualified. So his job is to catalog the data that they were working on in terms of the F1 engines, because by the time 1960, 1961 rolled along, when you had John F. Kennedy announce the Apollo moon missions, they needed a rocket. They needed a powerful rocket engine in order to make this mission successful. And that's when it switched over from a military purpose to the Apollo program. So the F1 engines were now being designed specifically for the Apollo moon program. And that's where Bill Kaysing saw that the data he was looking at was altered when it was released to the public.
Right. And so they were altering, when it was released to the public. So he kind of was seeing, and how is it being altered?
Well, basically they were just changing the numbers to
just make the math work to essentially
that it's working and that it's meeting expectations, that it's meeting its design specifications. I have to put this into perspective. The average rocket engine back then produced about 200,000 pounds of thrust. Okay. And most of the rockets, in the Saturn program, they used the H1 engines, which was produced 200 pounds of thrust in the Saturn 1B. Now, the F1 engine, and I think it had 8 engines in the H1 in the Saturn 1B rocket. Now, to put that into perspective, each rocket, as I said, each rocket engine produced about 200,000 pounds of thrust. The F1 engines was designed to produce 1.5 million pounds of thrust.
Wow.
That's a lot. That's a lot of power. And there was 5 engines designed into the Saturn V. So you had a total combined 7.5 million pounds of thrust. You needed that amount of power, that thrust, to lift that hardware I mentioned earlier, that 46 tons of Apollo spacecraft. It was the output that Bill Kaysing noticed was being altered to fit the narrative, to promote the idea that the Apollo missions were real. And he resigned in 1963 in disgust.
Right. And so what had they been doing leading up to the Apollo missions in terms of like technologically that like were they doing anything that was near in terms of?
You see, this is the thing. And this is what's really amazing. And Bart Sabrillas talked a lot about this too. They basically, when Kennedy made that statement in 1961, I believe it was the United Nations or it was to the American Congress, one or the other. They had a total of 15 minutes experience in the suborbital flight with one astronaut. That's just with one astronaut. Mm-hmm. And that was with the Mercury program. You had Mercury program, then you had the Gemini program, and then you had the Apollo program. You had 3 main manned missions in the 1960s, and they were all leading up to the Apollo program. So in answer to your question is, they just barely got started when they announced this Apollo program. So they had 8 years to not only they had to invent the technology, then they had to design it, and then they had to manufacture it, and then they had to test it, all in 8 years. And we're talking 13 launches that they supposedly launched between 1969 and 1975. The last 2 years, actually, the Apollo program ended in 1972, but they launched, I think, 2 more. They launched the Skylab space station after that, and then it was discontinued. It was never used again. And here's the interesting part about all of this, is that Bill Kaysing noticed earlier how either information regarding the F1 engines was either being fraudulent or it was just written wrong. It was blatant lies. And now a lot of those documents have disappeared, especially when it comes to the F1 engines and the Saturn V rocket itself. A lot of the schematics have been destroyed. And you have to wonder, is that proof of the hoax? No, it's not proof. But when you look at that and you build on the details, then it becomes obvious that something nefarious was going on here.
Right. And I mean, there's obviously the whole thing of why haven't they gone back? And, there's, I forget who, but there's someone who's like, we don't have the technology to do that. Right. And you're like, well, then what happened to it? There was what was it? All the deleted reels, like they just lost them all.
Yeah. So that's very interesting because I wrote a chapter about that in my book, my first book. And so for each mission, there was approximately 14,000 reels of telemetry tape. Now, the telemetry tape has 3 very important pieces of information on it. It had of course, the live visual feed from the moon surface. Then it had the biomedical information, and then it had basic telemetry from the spacecraft itself. And that was back then, for people, you have to realize that this was the tape age. There was no digital computers back then. It was all tape to tape.
It's all tape, yeah.
Right? Analog. So basically what happened is it would be recorded onto one reel, and one reel contains about 15 minutes of information. So multiply that one reel, which is about the size of a car steering wheel, by 14,000. And that was what you had left over from the Apollo 11 missions, 14,000 reels of telemetry tapes. Well, those are the tapes that you're talking about. And yes, they have disappeared. And NASA has come out with all kinds of excuses. And basically, actually, they leave it up to their proponents to do that. And it's pretty comical sometimes. They come out and say, well, the tapes went missing but they had to tape over them because there was a tape shortage, to every excuse you can think of. My investigation shows, and I wrote this in my book, that NASA took those tapes out of the archives and NASA destroyed them.
And you think they're... Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Not just to finish the point, not just the 14,000 reels of telemetry tapes for Apollo 11, all of them. So we're talking over 140,000 reels of telemetry tapes have gone missing from the National Archives related to all of the Apollo missions. Remember, there were 6 of them that landed on the moon, supposedly, and all of that data is gone.
Every single one of it. And they say that it was either overwritten due to just a resource shortage.
Yeah,
that's one of the answers. I mean, you think they'd have unlimited resources.
The most popular answer. Actually, the most popular answer I've had from the proponents is that, well, there was a tape shortage, and it really boggles the mind when you think about it, because we're talking about NASA here. We're talking about billions of dollars in resources. Right. You would think that they could have a few extra dollars to buy a few more tapes. So my investigation showed, and this is again in the book, and this is coming from NASA. This is what's really baffling. This is actually coming from NASA itself. If people just look at the details and read the details, NASA itself says those tapes, all of them, were signed out by NASA from the National Archives in the early 1970s. The tape shortage that they're talking about didn't happen till the early 1980s. And what's more, all those tapes that were signed out, the Apollo telemetry tapes that were signed out, they broke protocol. They didn't follow procedure. NASA's written on the documents as the ones who signed it out, but there's no specific name, so there's no paper trail.
Right.
And they disappeared after that.
And why so? Because it seems pretty sloppy. Like, yeah. Is it just because they thought nobody would ever kind of poke around into this?
You know what? I sort of, I mean, this is...
that's kind of almost on par with the dog ate my homework.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there are reasons why are open to speculation, but my speculation is the one I really stand by the most is NASA had to get those tapes back from the archives. They had to destroy them, because what if, and this actually happened, what if some intrepid scientist or documentary movie producer comes along and says, I want the tapes so as I can access the data to make a really good documentary for you to promote the anniversary. Well, can you imagine the shock of listening back to those tapes and finding out that there's nothing on them?
Right.
Yeah. And that would be your proof. And that actually happened. Ron Howard, again, he decided he wanted to make the 40th anniversary, an anniversary of the Apollo 11 mission, the first mission to land on the moon back in 2009. So he contacted NASA and he said, I'd like to have the telemetry tapes because I'd like to access the live feed, because he wanted to put it on IMAX, right?
Yeah.
So great idea at the time, until he was informed, we don't have the tapes. They don't exist, and we don't know where they are. And our investigation shows that they haven't turned up. So he had to resort to using old VHS video footage for his documentary, and people can look that up. That's all fact.
Right. And so do you think that the entire thing was just a Cold War necessity essentially by the United States government in order they needed to show that they had been to the moon?
I think that's the impression they wanted to give, but that's not what they were worth. That's not what was going on behind the scenes. I'm convinced of that now. Excuse me.
Because it seems like they definitely had the motive in terms of the Cold War of wanting to compete with the Russians to just, and everybody's saying, it was filmed in a soundstage or whatever. They definitely had the incentive to do that. That's clear, I think.
Yeah, that's one level. I mean, there are
Yeah.
many levels to this, and that's kind of like, and I'm basically not putting people down because I thought that myself too. But that's basically a two-dimensional approach to it. I believe now, from all the research that I've done, that the Russians knew damn well that these missions were faked back in 1969. They knew where they were going to fake it before they even launched Apollo 11. And I believe that there is some evidence, I actually more than circumstantial evidence, that the Russians not only knew about this, but that the Americans and the Russians were working very closely together on it.
The Russians and the Americans were working together to fake the moon landing.
Not so much to fake the moon landing. The Russians knew about it.
Okay.
So the Russians got in on this, and they knew what was going on. I mean, these are not stupid people. They have some very brilliant scientists, and they were further ahead in their manned space program. In every category you look at in the 1960s, from all their manned launches, they were the first to put an astronaut in orbit. A full orbit, I mean a full low Earth orbit. They were the first to put 2 astronauts in orbit. They were the first to put a woman in orbit. They were the first to put 3 astronauts in orbit, and they were the first to actually have 2 spaceships in orbit and rendezvous and dock. I mean, they were first in everything they did. They were number 1.
Right. So then,
but somehow the Americans came back,
just
shot ahead from a suborbital flight in 1961 and landed a man on the moon in 1969. And when you think about the technological leap that takes, the technological leap that would involve, anybody who sits back, just look at how technology works. Technology doesn't work like that. It's a progression. It's layered on top of each other, just like we see with aviation, we see with ships in aviation, right? You just don't fly across the ocean in a jet. You've got to get there first. So you got there with the single engine airplane, single engine prop, and then we build from that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's no documents for that left because we don't need those documents because we've already built on that technology. Unlike the Apollo moon missions, it's not just the documents for the Saturn V and the F1 engines that have disappeared. Grumman, who made the corporation, who made Lunar Module, and United American, who made the if I got that correctly, the corporation might have that wrong, but nonetheless, the corporations that made the manufactured these spacecraft have basically destroyed their own schematics.
Right. And so just going back to this Russia-U.S. kind of alliance, I guess. So if you're saying that they knew about it, to what end? What was the purpose of that? Because weren't they, the idea is that they were enemies at the time.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But you're saying they were actually working together. So I guess.
Well, I wouldn't say they're the best of friends. Okay. So I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that they're buddies behind the scenes. What I'm saying is that they both understood the reality. They both play their people. All right.
Okay.
We were being played. The Russian people were being played. It's a form of control. And I think you alluded to that earlier when you asked me what was the reason. You gave a reason. And I would have to say that that's one of the primary reasons, because it creates an illusion, and it creates a form of control and manipulation. And it's just one part of a whole. The Apollo missions itself doesn't stand alone in this. You have to layer in many other factors. And it takes quite a while to go through all this. But I do believe that the Russians knew about it. In fact, a lot of people don't realize this, but when the Apollo 13 splashed down, and that was the one I mentioned earlier that had the so-called accident.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, there are two Apollo 13 capsules on display. The question is, where did the other one come from?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened is, and this is all fact, this is again not speculation, there are actual media reports of the Soviet Union at that time handing over what they call a boilerplate command module to the Americans on a Coast Guard. There's actual footage of this. USA Stripes, that military magazine, was posting articles about this. The Russians had picked up a command module in the North Atlantic Ocean and brought it back to their one of their military bases in the Soviet Union called Mansk. I think it was the city of Mansk. And they went through a big ceremony of handing that back. But so the question is, where did that command module come from? Well, a boilerplate means that it's a dummy command module. What they use is when they don't want to launch an actual command module and they're just testing a rocket, they put a dummy on top.
Yeah.
right? So how is it that there's no record of a missing boilerplate command module? There's no record of that. The only record we have is the Apollo 13 splashdown. But yet the Russians, on the very next day after the Apollo 13 launch, picked up a command module boilerplate that's used for training. How did it get how did it get in close proximity to their territorial waters? That's the question.
And what do you think? It was just placed there? It was just dropped off? Like it was dropped off for just like this kind of photo op, essentially?
Or did the Apollo 13 launch fail? And was that...
And that's another option. Okay, so I have one more question before we're going to open the phone lines very shortly, because I'm sure a lot of people have some questions for you. So when you go back to this whole, you're alluding to this kind of, they were doing this for elements of control, I guess. I'm curious kind of if you can maybe elaborate, expand on that a little bit, just I'm interested what your thoughts are about that. So because I think because I never actually heard that kind of point. So anyways, go ahead.
Well, first of all, it's very difficult to prove what I'm saying. But second of all, you have to look, when you look at all the details, you sort of get into that situation. Well, why would they be doing this? What is the whole point? Is this more a psychological operation? Is this a psyops on both our peoples here in North America, the Soviet Union at the time, and the rest of the world? And it's very interesting to note that President Kennedy, months before he was assassinated, had ordered the director of NASA at that time, James Webb, to meet with his Russian counterpart in their space program and work out a possible agreement. Remember, it was Kennedy that launched this in 1961, and there's now evidence coming out that Kennedy was actually going to cancel the Apollo moon program in favor of detente and working more closely with the Soviets, which they were working with anyway, but they were going to come out in public. And I think that kind of that would have blown a lot. That would have been a major blow to the agenda in terms of control, because the only way to control people is to give them an enemy. And the Americans are really good at that, and so are the Soviets too. I'm not knocking America. I like America, but I'm just saying that give them an enemy, give them somebody to hate. It's a form of control. Hey, we went to the moon, we landed there. It's all about hubris, right? Right. We landed there. We're great. We're number one, and we're proud, and it just is a domino effect from that point on.
Right. Okay. We got a call. One moment, please. Hello. Thanks for calling Low Value Mail. Who am I speaking with?
Just me, bro.
What's up? One moment while I patch you through. All right, go ahead. You're on with Randy.
Hey, what's going on, Randy? First off, are you a globalist or are you a flat tard?
We had a. No, I think he's referring to. I would assume that we had maybe 6 months ago or a year ago. We had a flat Earth guy on yeah. It's more of a joke because he said the funniest thing is he called all people who believe in spherical Earth, I guess, globalists.
Okay, is he still there? Or is he gone?
I just thought that was funny. No, his name's Flat Earth Dave. He's this isn't the guy who's calling in. That says someone else. But anyways, go ahead, caller.
Yeah. So what is it? Like I have a background in geology and stuff, and also I did want to bring up the Soviet stuff. But what is it? The first thing with the Soviets, you're familiar with the lost cosmonaut conspiracy theory. I don't think it's really much of a conspiracy theory, but like the whole thing that like Yuri Gagarin was not the first human in space, but he was the first human to return from space. Like the Soviet Union, like they sent up like maybe like 1 to 3 confirmed cosmonauts who didn't make it back to Earth, but they, refuted the news. Are you familiar with this conspiracy theory by chance?
Vaguely, yes. I didn't really pay much attention to it, but there's been a lot of, on both sides, a lot of misinformation and disinformation. So you got to be careful. You got to pick and choose what you want to go with. But go ahead.
Well, yeah. So with the Soviet Union, first off, it's like it has been well known, especially with that little mistake that happened in Chernobyl. Like, Soviet Union covers up all failures. They're like, no, we can only play the best of our abilities. But what is it? I mean, that's just one thing you're talking about, like associating with cosmonauts and astronauts. But my thing is, what do you know about the lunar samples? Because as a geologist, what is it? I've done things like hyperspectral analysis of like mineral samples, and like it works like 100% of the time. Where like you can like identify rock as you know what it is by hyperspectral analysis. Like it gives you a spectral response based on like light bouncing back from like a rock material you hold in your hand. But why isn't there any of that done on the lunar samples? And also, I wouldn't trust if they would do it themselves. Like, I would have to have them go to the factory that makes the hyperspectral analysis machines. Like,
yeah. Wasn't there the thing too?
I don't believe
it. Well, I was just gonna say, wasn't there the thing with the moon rock where it was like petrified wood or something that they had it at
Yeah. One of the things that got stolen or whatever the fuck it was like, yeah, dude, this is Earth material, and like it's impossible that you'd find this.
Yeah.
Like on the moon.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Because there's like different theories on how. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Randy.
So let's start with a couple of things here first. So there's, again, a lot of misinformation and disinformation when it comes to this. First of all, I'll give you an example. I'm not a geologist. I'm just going by what I've read. And from people I have talked to who have a lot more experience and are qualified, a lot more experience in this. We know that a year before the launch of Apollo 11, that Wernher von Braun and a whole crew of his entourage had flown down to the South Pole, and they were gathering samples of moon rock. And so we know that, and we know that for a fact, right? And they actually gathered, I think it was several hundred pounds, and they brought it back. And the question is, why were they doing that? And there's never been a real, were they doing that, to test to see what it's like to actually test the moon rock? Well, couldn't they just wait till they get moon rock from the moon? So they had done that. Second of all, I have read instances where NASA will say that there's no water droplets or no moisture at any content at all in moon rock samples. Yet then I've read from their own narrative that they have found water samples, and this is going back 40 years. So there's, again, a lot of, back and forth misinformation. And the other question is, and this is the one I really like to focus on a lot, is, okay, so they say they have brought back an estimated, I think it was 800 pounds total of moon rock between all the 6 missions. So that works out to 140 pounds per mission. And not every mission was 140 pounds of moon rock. Some was 50 and some was 200. But how did they get them back into Earth's atmosphere? Because you're adding a lot of weight to the command module, and that's the angle that I like to go. And I haven't found a reasonable answer. You don't have when you're re-entering the atmosphere, you're getting into some serious forces, and that's when weight and balance becomes an issue, more so on re-entry. And if that added weight that they picked up from the moon, let's say they picked up 75, 80 pounds of moon rock, is not properly distributed within the spacecraft, that is, spacecraft comes in angled incorrectly and will burn up and kill the crew instantly. So that's kind of the angle I was looking at that. I leave the geology aspect of this up to the people who are qualified to look into this. And Jared White is one example. He's done some very good work on this. But that's kind of the angle where I came from. It's just that it's easy to say, well, they brought back several hundred pounds of moon rock. First of all, nobody's ever seen a photo of that. And second of all, to your other question you brought up, I too wouldn't trust NASA to investigate itself when it comes to the moon rock. But NASA is very careful about who inspects those moon rocks. Those moon rocks, people who inspect those moon rocks, they have to be scientists that are very heavily screened by NASA. They need to be working for established institutions or corporations that directly or indirectly get their funding from government. So you're not going to get an astronaut, you're not going to get a scientist or a geologist who is outside of that frame, who is independent. You're not going to get any of them asked to test the samples that they have in NASA locked up right now. And one more point I'd like to make is...
Go ahead, Randy.
Yeah, one more point I'd like to make is that there's also a lot of moon rock that has gone missing. So those are a few of the points that I.
But so there's moon rock that's gone missing from the 800 pounds, but there's no photos of what they even have. Is that correct?
I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it, and if there is, I haven't seen it. But that's what I.
And there's no museum or anything, because I heard you. I mentioned
there is.
Sorry, go ahead.
Cape Canaveral, in the Cape Canaveral Museum, they have like a little. It's either the Cape Canaveral Museum or the National Aviation and Space Museum in DC. They have like a little podium with like a little piece of rock underneath the glass, and like you can stick your hand in and touch it. Like it looks like the fakest stuff ever, but
I've been there. And it's And how do you know it's a moon rock, right?
Yeah, and then lastly, before I hang up, I just want to get your opinion on this. I've asked Danny this before. Since there has been recent news in the development of lunar exploration, how can it be justified that the nation of India landed some sort of robot on the moon, yet they don't have indoor plumbing? Like, I was sitting like, this is legit. I mean,
they do mostly have indoor plumbing, but I mean, more importantly, Japan just did it like a week ago or something, or 2 days ago, right? But I'm saying Japan just posted where like. They tried to land on the moon, this like rover thing or whatever, which is unmanned, and it landed like upside. They weren't even able to land it normally, upside down. Like the moon seems like the only thing where the technology goes backwards.
Yeah, and according to NASA, it's the only thing they do right. I mean, it's just absolutely, you're right. It's absolutely backwards. Just the point you made about India, I'd like to clarify. I've been to India several times. And India is a very interesting society in that it has very advanced technology, very comparable to what we have. And then they have the extreme, the poverty. So it's really
more of like a caste. Yeah. I know that.
Yeah. But they do have technological capabilities. I don't believe that they're everything that has been said about them in terms of landing an unmanned probe on the moon. I believe the first one actually crashed, and then they miraculously got the second one right. I think this because they were given erroneously the wrong data by, I don't know, it was outside forces, maybe NASA. The other thing I want to add to this point is that NASA has an agreement, and they're pretty forceful about it, with all nations that have space technology capabilities. Or launch capabilities, which is not many, which should be. I mean, if this technology was 50 years, do you think there'd be a lot more nations that have that capability?
At this point,
one's allowed, but nobody is allowed to launch and land anything anywhere near the Apollo landing sites on the moon. That is off limits to everyone.
And what is the penalty? And is just that you're up against the might of the United States government?
Well, you know what? When you talk about the United States government, yes. I mean, it's not so much the United States government. Or the United States, it's the people. The American people are peaceful people. I don't think anybody has a problem with them.
Not the last
United States. Yeah, well. Okay. Everybody has this opinion. The United States government, it's when you have a central bank is very powerful, and it has tentacles that reach around the world, and they control other central banks. That's the whole idea of a central bank. The central bank system gives, I call them a world cabal. They control everything. I mean, it's a foreign entity.
And that's one of the things that they're enforcing. Essentially, you cannot land on the moon without our permission. Okay, we got another caller. One moment, please. Hello, thanks for calling Low Value Mail. Who am I speaking with?
Hey, Danny, it is the Goob.
The Goob. I've been waiting to hear from you. One moment, please, while we patch you through to Randy. All right, Goob, you're on with Randy. Go ahead.
Hey, Randy. So just to clarify, it's strictly the moon landing that you deny. You acknowledge other space travel, or no?
Yeah. I think that they've shown some good capabilities in terms of manned missions to low Earth orbit. Yeah.
Okay. So, given that we are going to space and NASA lies, and like you said, they do so quite blatantly sometimes, almost seemingly like they want to get caught. I suspect that the moon landing hoax is the psyop, and that they want people to question the moon landing because they don't want people to question what they're actually doing in space, and we possibly have far greater capabilities. Do you put any weight into that idea?
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. And it could very well be used as a distraction. I wouldn't argue with you on that point. Unfortunately, they put us in that position. So in order to get at what they're really hiding, we kind of prove this is fake and get this out of the way. But yeah, it's a good point. I agree.
Yeah. And Goob, what is your theory on what that might be? Because that is an interesting theory.
I really don't know. There is, and I forget the name off the top of my head, but there is an amateur astronomer photographer who supposedly captured images of some very large, spaceships pretty deep in space in our solar system. But other than that, I don't really have anything to go on besides the idea that, this could be a psyop that they're trying to distract from, what they're actually doing. But I don't know what that would be.
Interesting.
I believe that they do have, that the American government and the Russian government has technology that's far advanced than what we know of today. If by any chance I'm wrong and they went to the moon, I know one thing: they didn't go with technology that they claimed they used. So your point is well taken. Is there spaceships out there? I don't know. I don't discount anything these days, especially after the last 4 years. Anything is possible. I do believe that there's a controlling entity running this world, and it's not the people we see.
Yeah.
I'm right there with you on that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's all I had for you. Thank you for entertaining me.
Goob, everybody. All right, we got another call. One moment, please. Hello. Thanks for calling Low Value Mail. Who am I speaking with?
This is Steve.
Steve, one moment, please. We'll patch you through to Randy. And you are on with Randy. Go ahead, Steve.
Hey, Randy. One of the claims.
Steve, can you speak up a little? Steve, can you speak up a little bit? It sounds like you're kind of a little distant.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Much better.
Hello?
Yes, very good.
Go ahead.
One of the claims about the moon landing is that there are too many people involved for it to be fake. So my question is, when we see the pictures of all the people working at NASA in the headquarters and at the mission control, were they aware of what's going on, or what was their role in the fake project?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I always wonder how many people could they have done, obviously for a conspiracy like this, because what's the total number of people who worked on it? 400,000 or something?
Yeah, so to put that into perspective, it's an estimated 400,000 people were working directly or indirectly on the Apollo program. But we're talking about those 400,000 people dispersed across the United States. So in the East Coast, the West Coast. So you're talking about 6 main contractors and 20,000 subcontractors. So it's very easy to keep this classified or a secret, if I can put it that way. So when somebody says, and the caller's not saying that, I'm just saying that if somebody says, well, how did 400,000 people keep a secret? Well, it's very easy. How do you think a corporation runs its own business? I mean, they have thousands of people working for them. Nobody knows what's going on in the upper echelons of power. Nobody knows what the real agenda is, right? So in terms of the, sorry, what was the second part of this question?
I think he was just saying, go ahead, caller.
Like on Apollo 13, the movie, they show all of the scientists sitting in mission control, watching the screen, and basically following along with the mission. Yeah. If the mission isn't real, what exactly are they doing?
Yeah, so another good question. So I actually wrote about this in my third book, which is just coming out now. And I actually wrote it in fiction form because I actually teamed up with another author, Robin Landry. And we decided, she approached me a year ago about this project, and let's, take all your knowledge and let's write it in fiction form. That way I can speculate a little further. So your question about mission controllers, well, mission controllers are on record, and this is actually on record. I don't specifically know who, but you can look that up, are on record stating that they couldn't tell the difference between a simulated mission and an actual mission. on their mission, on their control consoles while they were in mission control. Because remember, they ran a lot of simulated missions as well. And I believe all of the data that we see that's printed on paper, it didn't come from telemetry tapes. So it's obviously that's why they destroyed them. There was no data on them for that information to come from. I believe that those are all simulations. And so I just find that interesting. I think Gene Kranz, who was the director at the time for the Apollo 13 mission, I think he has said that, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that, but I believe he did say that a lot of the mission controllers couldn't tell the difference between a simulation and an actual mission. I do believe there might be one mission that was real, and that was Apollo 7. Apollo 7 was not a Saturn V launch. Apollo 7 was a Saturn 1B launch, and it used the less powerful engines, and they only went as far as low Earth orbit. If there's any mission that is real, I would lean more towards that one. I'm not totally convinced it was real, but that would be the one I would hold out for. And they couldn't tell the difference between that mission and a simulated mission. So I actually write a lot about this in my third book. It's too much to go into, but I go through it step by step by step, how they were able to give mission controllers the illusion that they were actually watching a real mission in real time.
So essentially the trial runs were essentially trial runs of basically they were just testing how they could essentially fool these people so that they could essentially go through the regular. And how many people are we talking about in this mission control? Because, you know, of the 400,000, I would imagine, 100 or something?
So, yeah, not even that. I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe 20, maybe 30. I mean, also you have to keep in mind that it was people were specifically designated to communicate with the astronauts in each mission, and that designated person who was in command of within mission control, who was in control, and they would designate a person, and the person who was in control for each of the missions was involved in one of the missions themselves. So they kept this very knit, close world where only a very few people in the know. I would say probably, if I was to an estimated figure at that time, maybe 150 people knew the real agenda, including the Apollo astronauts, of course, because they were directly involved. And mission controllers themselves, most of them didn't, but then mission controllers do what they're told, right? They have something coming into their computer screens and they report to their supervisor, and their supervisor reports to the designated person, and he makes the decision as to where we go from there. So it was a very, very, very controlled environment in mission control at that time. And as I said, I expand on this more in my book, where I can actually get into the details. And there's another thing to note too. NASA had launched an unmanned satellite before, I believe before each mission, and used that telemetry to the moon and back in part to help proceed with the simulation. So they had actual data coming in. I think in a couple of cases, I think if I'm not mistaken, some of it happened in real time. So you're giving, you're a mission controller. You don't know what's going on. You just only know what's going on your computer screen, and you report and you act.
And I mean, it's
that.
not like there was high definition video or anything like that.
Exactly. It was a lot easier to hide it back then. It wouldn't be that easy now, but it was a lot easier.
You would think now it would be pretty impossible.
I think that's why these missions keep failing. They keep saying they're going back. They just put Artemis, the new Artemis launch, which is basically the same design as the Apollo command module, only bigger. That was supposed to launch in 2024 this year. They've launched one mission. Then they launched another mission, unmanned, by the way, in the last couple of years. And they're hiding the data. They won't release the radiation data. And why are they hiding it? What's there to hide? I mean, you went there 50 years ago. Why are you hiding the data now? Right. And now they postponed the mission till 2026. So I knew that was going to happen. Actually, I predicted that myself a year ago. That mission will be canceled, and they will postpone it for a couple of years, which is exactly what they've done. And they postponed it to 2026, and it'll be canceled when we get there too. Whenever they get close to launching a manned mission to the moon, something happens, and it's postponed for another year or two.
And what are the reasons they give for them?
Any reason. I mean, they didn't give a reason for this one. They just said, well, we have to postpone it. They didn't really give a reason. I mean, the reason is obvious. They don't have the technological capability. or
Right.
they don't have access to that technological capability. So I don't believe NASA is. I think it's a front. Your previous caller was right. I think it's a psyop, but the psyop is wearing thin now on people, and I think people are starting to actually get it.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else, caller?
No, that was great. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is because I mean that, like I said, this is the one thing where it's the only thing where the technology goes in the opposite direction, right? And you know, as much as people continue to try and say why, because I guess if they could just do it, then that would kind of just you hear me there, Randy?
Yeah, sorry,
Oh,
my
sorry.
battery's going low, so I just
No problem. Yeah, I was just saying it's the only psyop, or not psyop. It's the only thing where they could just do it, and then that would just be the end of it. I guess it would somewhat put it to bed, at least if they were able to do it. Now, the radiation is obviously is that like essentially the main reason why, or one of the main reasons why they were unable to, why it's just not able to be done?
Oh, it's a big reason. I would put it. I would put it number one. I mean, it's a huge reason. I mean, you had the radiation belts around the Earth. For those of you who don't know, there's two main radiation belts around the Earth that surround the Earth, and they were named after scientist by the name of Van Allen, James Van Allen, back in the late 1950s. He discovered those belts when radiation belts, when they had launched unmanned probes up there, because they were getting ready for a manned mission. So they wanted to see, you know, they had some idea that there was some serious radiation up there and they had to know how to deal with it. So his basically almost his words were that he said, oh my goodness, he says, we have some serious radiation to deal with up here. And that's about the only time he ever made a statement like that. After that, he fell in line with the actual narrative that it was safe. The radiation Van Allen belts, the inner belt, which is proton dominated, is very severe. You can't send a manned crew through that. You have to go through the outer region, the outer belts, and then the outer region of the outer belts, which is electron dominated radiation. NASA says that, they went through it quickly, there was no harm. But there's been a lot of misinformation regarding that too, because I have discovered in my years of research while writing my first book that there's different distances in terms of how far the radiation belts from Earth go out. Like some say it goes out 20,000 miles, or some say it goes out 30,000 miles. You have to know exactly what the precise distance is if you're going to send a manned crew through that, because you have to know what kind of exposure they're going to be going through and what kind of shielding you need to add in order to attenuate that exposure. You're never going to get rid of radiation completely, but you can maybe sort of bring it down to an acceptable level. But all the data that I have seen says absolutely no way that they would be able to successfully send a manned mission through the radiation belts. And we're just talking about the Van Allen belts. Then you've got to deal with solar flares, coronal mass ejections. A coronal mass ejection from the sun, you get caught in one of those. We're talking about a solar flare that is probably 150,000 miles, maybe in diameter.
Wow.
And you got a spacecraft. It has enough. Coronal mass ejection has enough kinetic energy to boil the North Atlantic Ocean. You're telling me that little capsule gets caught when they're going to survive? No. And so NASA tells you, well, we just happened to be lucky when we went there and back because there was no solar flares. So that's their reasoning,
I guess. And so what would someone who, I guess, believes in the moon landing, what would they say about the radiation element? Like, would they just say we got lucky? Is that the answer?
Yeah, actually, it's a very interesting point you just brought up, because I had one of the books I had read was by a scientist outside of NASA, but she worked for I think she works for National Oceanic Society or something like that. She was a very interesting woman. And she basically said that. He said it was just by pure luck that they managed to get to the moon and back safely. One of the I think I'll just forget his name, but he replaced Van Allen in terms of the work and the study that they were doing on the radiation content of the Van Allen belts. And he was asked the question, is it safe to send manned missions through the Van Allen belts to the moon and back? And his response was, I thought was rather interesting and childish. And he says, well, it must be safe because we went there and back. That was his scientific analysis. That's, to those of you out there, that sounds like the last 4 years, right? Safe and effective.
Right. And what was like because maybe this is ignorant of me, but what was the actual purpose of going to the moon at the time? Just to see if they could do it?
Yeah.
Because I'm just wondering, because, then you're saying like everybody's getting put at risk here and they got lucky and you're to be alive, and then you're just purely adventure?
Well, it's interesting at the time because a lot of people didn't even believe it when it was happening. And it was only after the missions ended that NASA's PSYOPs kicked into their, propaganda program kicked into full gear, and then more people actually believed it. But their mission was exactly that. It's like, why did you climb the mountain? Well, because it's there. And so we're going to the moon because it's there. At the time, there was no intrinsic value. I mean, you would think that if they went to the moon 50 years ago, they would have built on that technology. It had bases there, used as a launch site for other manned missions to other planets like Mars. I mean, it's impractical to be launching from Earth. You can't do this. I mean, you can only go so high. That Saturn V was the largest, most powerful rocket ever built. If that thing had exploded on a launch pad, it would have been equivalent to about a kiloton, an atomic bomb, about a kiloton atomic bomb. It would have been devastating. So there's only so much in terms of practicability that you can do to get a crew off the ground. Actually, Werner von Braun said it earlier in the 1950s that the best way to be launching from Earth would be to build a space orbit platform, right? Assemble the spacecraft in orbit and launch from there. So the answer to your question is no, there was no practical reason to go to the moon. They never even really stated that.
Right. Yeah, this whole thing is very fascinating. By the way, the phone lines are open if anybody has any questions. 1-888-949-2969. So are you still finding out anything, does new stuff come out in your investigations into this stuff?
Yeah. It leads into a direction now that is like in the first two books, I concentrated a lot on, and actually in the third book too, I concentrate a lot on the technological aspects of NASA. But I'm beginning to see now that, and this angers a lot of people when you bring this up, but it is a fact. There's an occult aspect to NASA as well. And I'm now starting to, now I'm really starting to look at that. And I've actually wrote a chapter in my second book, chapter 1, where it gets into the occult aspect connections to NASA. And
can you elaborate on that any further?
Sure. There was a scientist back then in the 1930s, 1940s, and his name was Jack Parsons. And Jack Parsons is an amazing individual. Here was a man who at 18, 19, 20 years old walked into Caltech, that's California Institute of Technology, and to discuss rocket propulsion systems with a scientist there. Long story short, he ends up becoming a staff, and he had no higher education. He had no education higher than grade 12, and yet he's responsible for any success that anybody thinks that NASA has today. Jack Parsons is responsible for that. What makes Jack Parsons even more interesting is that he spent half his time working on rockets and the other half involved in occult. He was very involved with the Aleister Crowley, who was the famous occultist in Britain. Yep. And he was very involved with Ron L. Hubbard, who, of course, went on to develop
Scientology.
Started Scientology. Exactly. And for those of you out there to know, it's a real big, it's very influential when it comes to Hollywood. So so going back to Jack Parsons, he was very involved in that. And it turns out that a lot of scientists that were involved in the California Institute of Technology at that time were themselves involved in the occult. And it goes from there. Now, Jack Parsons was killed in an accident, supposedly, in 1952. but his theories were carried on to his theories are actually, because of his theories, it made the space shuttle successful. That's how brilliant he was. The other thing is that a lot of the astronauts themselves, I think all of them, maybe except for one or two, were Freemasons. And that just seems to be a recurring theme when it comes to anything of that magnitude, when it comes to projects connected to any government. There seems to be always some kind of occult connection, Freemasons, Skull and Bones, Illuminati, you name it. It was very involved. And the symbology is there as well. So, I mean, if you look deeper into Apollo 11 with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, was I think he was a 33rd degree Freemason. So at the same time, it's very interesting because James Webb, the director of NASA himself, was a Freemason, and so was President Lyndon Johnson at the just before it was after the he actually was out of office by that time, but he himself was a 33rd degree Freemason. So you have to ask yourself, what is this really all about? And when you get deeper into the occult aspect, it's quite a rabbit hole. So I'm looking more into that now, but it's quite interesting, and it just makes me wonder if that isn't really as your previous caller was getting at earlier, if that maybe not be the real purpose here.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, maybe if you need trustworthy people to keep secrets, some sort of secret society would be where you'd want to get people
actually
from.
Exactly. So in my third book, my recent book, I actually talk about that. And there's a scene in there where, he's wondering why everybody's so compliant, because he's not part of the Freemasons himself. And you follow Freemasonry orders before you follow military orders, even though all the astronauts were military. And that's another interesting aspect of this, is the military is in full control of the NASA Apollo program at the time, and they were all military personnel that were involved in that, including the astronauts, but they were all Freemasons, and they answered to Freemasonry first, the military second.
Interesting. And what where did you I guess come across that information? Where they kind of, or is that just the rules of Freemasonry? How do you know that, I guess?
I can. Well, there's doctrines out there. Freemasonry do actually like to brag about what they are and who they are and what their rules are. And you do have to, it gets very, it's very ritualistic. You go through a very serious ritualistic program. I think a lot of your listeners right now are aware of that. And you swear an oath or it's death.
Yeah.
You swear an oath to them first.
Interesting. And so are you of the idea that, just because I guess there's the theory that Stanley Kubrick did, from all the video that they provided, is that kind of what you're thinking, or like that was just made in some soundstage in California?
Yeah. So there's a couple of places where this could have been filmed, and whether or not Stanley Kubrick himself was involved, he kind of alluded to that in the movie The Shining, and there's a lot of undertones in that movie. Jay Widener did some work on that, and he
also, his final movie is all about the occult, and then he died the day of the premiere.
Well, so we're told.
Well,
he died. Yeah. Whether he was directly involved or not, I don't know. But he had one or two special effects experts working with him at all times on his movies. And I believe that they were involved. Whether he was directly involved, I don't know. I think it would be too risky if he was seen there. He was seen meeting with officials, NASA officials, but he was never really seen directing, at least it hasn't been talked about, an actual faking at the moon set, if I could put it that way. But I think his special effects expert was definitely involved. So yeah, I think there's some Stanley Kubrick influence. There's no doubt about that. I mean, you just have to look at what he did with Dr. Strangelove, with his technology. The interesting thing about that movie is that he was denied access to a B-52. So he went and bought all these magazines, and he actually built his own version of the B-52. And he's so accurate in depicting the B-52 in that movie with Peter Sellers, Dr. Strangelove, that he was basically approached by the military and given some interesting technology in order to help him with his movies, and I think that was used on the Apollo missions. One of the things I do.
Sorry, we got a call right here.
Yep.
Just hold that thought for
Yep.
one moment, please. Hello, thanks for calling Low Value Mail. Who am I speaking with?
Hey, what's up, Danny?
Hey, who is this?
Mike.
Mike, one moment, please, Mike. All right, Mike, you're on with Randy. Go ahead.
Hey, man. So I kind of tuned in late. I really hope you didn't talk about this already. Do you think the moon was put there for any? Are you into any of the Anunnaki or any of that kind of lore?
I find that intriguing, and let me qualify my remarks here. The last 4 years, I think I've been awake a lot for the last 20 years, but the last 4 years really opened my eyes a lot more, and I wouldn't discount that. Whether the moon
Can you just explain to people who don't know specifically what that is?
The Anunnaki?
Me or him?
Caller, you can explain it. Question.
The moon was put there to we're a civilization that was made by an alien race, and the moon was put there to control or kind of spy on us. It's wacky.
Yeah.
Well, it's wacky, but what's happening right now? We're coming out of a very strange part of our history, and the juxtaposition of the Earth and our solar system to the center of our galaxy is exposing us to more rays, and this is a theory, okay? And those rays are actually increasing awareness and raising consciousness, which explains what's been going on along the last couple of years. The moon is, by theory, and I'm just talking theory, is in theory part of that. Some people think it's a gigantic spaceship, that it does have life on it. There's some very strange activity that is going on the moon that hasn't been explained.
I'm sorry, what do you think, though?
I think it's.
What's your greatest theory on the?
I wouldn't say I have a viable theory on that, but what I will say is that what you brought up is intriguing.
Yeah. The problem is to get proof for something that's
question?
so far away. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think the depth of the moon is thin, and all those craters are not deep enough to because the moon is hollow? Again, this is a wacky theory.
Actually, it's not so wacky. I have read physicists' accounts of the moon, and several of them have said that the moon is too large for it to be in the orbit it is in at its present time. So
yes.
So that sounds like a viable theory to me. Second of all, those craters look too circular to be random hits. It's almost as if it's done on purpose for some other reason. I don't know if there's some. It looks like it was actually done on purpose for maybe excavating. I mean, it just as someone pointed out, when the meteoroid comes in, it comes in at an angle, and it would displace a lot of the debris forward in the direction of the
one direction or the other.
Exactly, but you don't see that on the moon surface. You see perfect circles. So what is that all about?
Danny, if I may, one last question.
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
The ringing of the moon when they crashed things into the moon, or when they landed things hard enough to maintain a vibration over X amount of hours. Again, I'm not educated in the
what do you mean by ringing
details,
of the
you know
moon?
Anything about that?
Yeah.
So there's theories that when they pounded, where they landed something hard enough that the moon would vibrate,
basically ringing like a bell,
a tone. Yes.
Yeah, actually, you're right, Danny. You just hit it. NASA's actually said that they have crashed several of their own probes into the lunar surface, and the exact wording was it rang like a bell. So the Earth doesn't ring like a bell. So something else is going on there in the moon. So I would say I could say this about the moon: what we were taught in history is wrong. It's just false. That much.
Maybe a fourth book then.
It sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. Jeez. All right. Anything else, caller? Yeah.
Take care, man. No.
Appreciate it. Yeah, this is all wild stuff. Have you noticed as of recently, because you've been on this, when did your first book, what year did your first book come out?
2018.
2018. But you've been kind of interested in this for 20 years. Have you been noticing that the kind of interest in, I guess, alternative theories here has been increasing? Because I'll say this, I've said it before, but if you asked me 10 years ago, maybe even 5, probably not 5, but probably 10 years ago, what my thought is, I'd be like 100% they went to the moon. I'm like, there's no question, like they did. And now I'm definitely, nowhere near that. Right. And I surely I can't be the only one. I mean, there's 200 people watching this live right now or more, maybe 300 people. And thousands. I'm sure a lot of people think the same, but like, is this something you've been noticing, I guess?
Yeah. Yes, I have actually. And again, a lot more so in the last 10 years, more specific in the last 4 years. The last 4 years has had a profound effect on people, and it's opened people's eyes a lot and made them more receptive to other ideas and to alternative history. And I have a book, it's a distant book, but it is a project I'm working on in terms of alternative history. Your previous caller mentioned the Anunnaki. I'm not going to get into that tonight, but there is some evidence now that it's not so much that they seeded the human race, but they may have interfered with the genetic aspect of the human race, if that theory holds up and is true. And when you look at ancient texts, the Old Testament, the New Testament, I mean, how else can you describe what you read in those books as, when you take a primitive individual back then, primitive by our standards, no insult to them, we'll be primitive by 1,000 years and to other people's standards. But when you take an individual back then and he sees this object coming down from the sky, how else would he interpret it as God? So, so I mean, this needs to be looked at. This needs serious investigation. And one more point, Darwin's theory of evolution doesn't hold up. It holds up okay when it comes to mammals, but animals, but it doesn't seem to hold up very well when it comes to humans. And even experts who promote the theory, Darwin's theory of evolution, will admit that there's gaps in terms of human evolution. So that definitely that's a whole other book and a whole other subject.
Yeah, it's a whole, and yeah. I mean, I still can't get over just the fact that it, like, you're saying the primitive thing, and I know I've already said this, but just seems to be literally the only technology that's gone backwards.
Yeah,
and
destroyed.
And destroyed. Again, I guess destroyed, assuming it ever even existed, right? That's
I was reading a historian. I was expecting a call to come at me about this, but they haven't. So if they do, here's the answer. There's apparently thousands of microfilm that's been stored on the Saturn V rocket. But I've documented this in my book, in my first book, and is a space historian. And he's very pro-Apollo. He believes the missions happened, but he admits he went down and looked at this microfilm of the Saturn V rocket, and he said there are huge gaps. There is no complete schematic of this technology that was built 50 years ago. It's gone. And I want to add one more thing. A famous astronaut, Dom Pettit, he flew in the shuttle once, and I think he was on the International Space Station twice. He's on record as saying that when he was asked would he go to the moon, he said he'd go to the moon in a nanosecond, but we've destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to bring it back. That's quite a statement from a NASA astronaut.
Right. And again, I guess you have to just ask why. Like, why would they destroy it? Yeah, that just seems too much of a crazy accident where they go, well, we just misplaced this technology.
Well, there's a funny story about 3 Japanese businessmen, and this is actually true. They wanted to commemorate, I think it was the 10th anniversary of the first Apollo moon landing, Apollo 11. So they came over and they wanted to actually get the schematics for the lunar module, and they were going to build a replica of that lunar module. And they were going to bring it back to Japan and open up a museum and have a commemoration, basically, in the 10-year dedication to the moon land. Well, so they went to the corporation and they had a meeting with the corporation who built the lunar module, which was at the time Grumman. And embarrassingly, they had to tell him that, well, we don't have those schematics. They were destroyed. They had one box in the back room somewhere that had some sketches of what the lunar module was, but there was no schematics left. All of it was gone, destroyed.
Crazy.
So they basically went back in empty-handed. But it was amazing.
Sorry, we just got another call. Just put a pin in that. One moment, please. Hello. Thanks for calling Low Value Mail. Who am I speaking? Oh, we lost them. Okay, go. You there, Randy? Uh-oh. Randy, can you hear me? I think it did something here. Can you hear me, Randy? No. I don't know what happened here. That was not something I did. Can you hear me? No, you can't hear me, Randy? For some reason, the call failed. Hold on a second. I'm going to try. Let me see if we can mute him and unmute him again, because for some reason when I went to go pick up that call, hold on. Can you hear me there, Randy? What's going on here? No, you can't hear me? I don't know. Okay. Oh, join with computer audio. Hello, Randy, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, sorry about that. We had a little hiccup. Okay, we got a call here. Hello.
Hey, Danny, it's Format. How are you doing?
Format, how's it going, buddy? 1 sec. Let me just transfer you over. And Format, all right, you're on with Randy. Go ahead.
Awesome. Hey, Randy, nice to see you on the show. Just learning about you today, but I will totally get into a lot more of your work because you speak my language. So I had a question. Two questions. The first one is about. I was wondering if you can just go over kind of like a laundry list of Apollo goofs, if you know what I mean by goofs, in the sense of like when you go to IMDb, say like on the Matrix IMDb page, you can see goofs like where at one point, you know, there's like a microphone in the frame and things like that, right? So like clear goofs like that in the Apollo footage, or just things like for example, like I have a little list, I'll give it to you, and if you have something similar, it'll be great to hear, right? So for example, I think like the battery, it would have fried there. We know the exact battery they had, and it would have fry under direct sunlight. You know, the spacesuits wouldn't protect them from radiation. The Apollo craft wouldn't protect them from radiation, right? And then, of course, there's dogmatic scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson who will say that, you know, they got around the Van Allen belt. But no one ever, you know, NASA never said they went around the Van Allen radiation belt. He's just making it up to fit his own, beliefs. And then, and then of course the telemetry data, you know, if they really did go around the radiation belt, the telemetry data is missing, which their excuses for everything missing are just ridiculous. They said they lost some of it and they wrote over some of it, something like that, or just wrote over all of it accidentally because they're fucking retarded. Anyways,
we covered that a bit. I mean, is there anything he left out? There seems to be just so many things with this specifically.
I could add a couple of things to his.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
One sec. Just before you give your list, I had two things to finish off, and then you give yours. Just so there's the moon dust. I think is a great one. Like the moon. They're like, okay, well, if you guys went there, well, let's see the moon dust. The moon dust had petrified trees in it, so it's not moon dust. It's dust from Earth.
Yeah, it was
right.
Wood, yeah.
So, shadows on the photo suggest nearby light sources. There's a photo with the same background showing the moonlander there, and then a photo of the same exact background, but no moonlander, and the photo is labeled as some location like further away. Right. That's like one of the perfect goofs. So more stuff like that.
All right, thanks, Format.
Okay, so
yeah, Randy, go ahead.
Okay, so well, first of all, hello to Toronto. I actually noticed he's in Toronto. I moved from there 2 years ago. So
during COVID,
very well.
That was it for you.
Yeah, it was nuts. Yeah. Anyway, so there's a couple of things that are very interesting regarding, we went around the Van Allen belts. Now, it changes every few years in terms of their track through the Van Allen belts. First, they said they couldn't go through the inner Van Allen belts, but then one mission at this day, they spent 15 minutes in it, and you can't spend 15 minutes in the inner Van Allen belt. The radiation is too intense. And then they said, we went through the outer regions of the Van Allen belts, but that doesn't even hold up either because their trajectories from the equator of the Earth, of course, right? So, I mean, we're talking, and it just changes. And Van Allen himself said, the only way to go around the Van Allen belts is either launch from the North or South Pole. So we know that didn't happen. So that's all misinformation put out by NASA. They just like to muddy the waters. In terms of the photos, I've worked a lot and have done quite a few interviews with Marcus Allen. Marcus Allen is the UK distributor for Nexus magazine, and he's been researching this for 25, 30 years, and he's done some very good work on the photo and film record of the Apollo missions. And one of the things that he has pointed out, and I like to use this, and he's really brilliant when it comes to analyzing this, is the second man on the moon was Buzz Aldrin. Buzz Aldrin was, officially speaking, was the second man to set foot on the moon. There's a famous photo of him that was used on National Geographic. I wish I had it here. I don't, but you can look it up on Google. National Geographic. Now, when you look at the photo, is taken supposedly by Neil Armstrong, but there's a couple of things that are very obvious, even to the untrained eye. And I don't spend a lot of time on the photographic evidence because I'm just not, qualified and have enough expertise to do that. But there's a couple of things that stand out. And the first thing is that the cameras that were used to take photos on the moon were positioned here on their chest, right? Yeah. So, but when you look at the photo of Buzz Aldrin, it's almost as if the camera's at an angle from higher up.
Yeah, I'm looking. This is from the cover of National Geographic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's on an angle looking down.
Right.
So there's a red flag there. The other one for me was, and I don't know if that's the version you have, but when you look at the background of the lunar surface, you notice that the light is very intense where Buzz Aldrin is standing, and then it slowly starts to fall off, right? The distance you go behind him. They've since touched that up because a lot of people noticed that. That can't happen. There's only one source of light when they went to the moon, supposedly went to the moon, and that source of light is the sun. That whole area of light on the lunar surface should be uniform. There should be no falling off of light. It's like shining a flashlight at a tennis ball. You shine a flashlight at a tennis ball from a distance, and this is a crude example, that the whole surface is lit. Like there's no falling off of light within the tennis ball itself. The light falls off as it gets past the tennis ball. And it's the same thing with the moon. So that should be all bright. And since then, NASA has brightened that surface, but you can still find old issues of National Geographic back in 1969 that has the original photo that NASA did publish to their dismay, their mistake. It was one of those, as your previous caller was talking about, those mishaps. And there's another one where Alan Bean was doing one of his commemoration tours or whatever for his mission. I think he was on Apollo 12, if I'm not mistaken. And Bart Sabril had asked him a question, did you have any effects going through the Van Allen belts? And he came back and said, his answer was, well, I don't think we went out that far. And Bart Sabril said, well, you would have to go out that far and through them to get to the moon. And he said, oh, yeah, you're right. No, there wasn't any effects. So, it's all kinds of very
these weird
interesting
little
statements like that. Yeah.
Like
it's slipping up, right?
Right. There's just these like kind of Anything else there?
From that? And the other thing also relating to the moon, I wanted to ask sort of a similar question. But okay, so I've been fascinated with the moon for a long time since finding out all kinds of weird things about it, well, for example, quotes from people. I think it was Carl Sagan who said that the moon is like more likely to be an observational error. Was it Carl Sagan? I think you would know.
It could be because Carl Sagan had two layers to him. One was the official, and one was subtle. where he would say something officially, but then he'd give out a subtle message and sort of discounting, sort of contradicting what he had actually said. And I've read a lot of that. One other thing about the moon, I was just thinking about this when you were talking, caller, is there seems to be some very interesting heat sources now developing on the lunar surface. I think it's in the south eastern quadrant that faces the Earth. So some people have been noticing this, have been watching the moon a lot. So there's some kind of activity going on there. I don't know if it's natural, but there's no atmosphere. So I don't know what that source would be, but that's something to continue looking at.
Huh.
Okay. Well, so let me ask the question then. So the question was basically like I have another like laundry list of weird things about the moon.
Yeah. We gotta just. I think. Yeah, go ahead. Just try and make it quick because there's some other people. I think it's extensive, but. Okay, yeah. If you know any others that I don't, let me know. So things like the transient lunar phenomena, incredible, well observed. Lights showing up all over the moon, suggesting maybe some kind of gas escaping the moon. Of course, one of the previous callers mentioned the moon was ringing after we crashed some satellites into it. We crashed two. We crashed a small one, then a bigger one. And both of them were giving us some pretty good seismic readings that suggest that the moon could be hollow. The strangeness of the distance of the moon from the Earth compared to the sun, how it perfectly overlaps with the sun, is a little sus. Of course, if you're really into science, you would know how astronomically impossible it is for a satellite of the size of the moon to get into the orbit that it's in. It's practically impossible. Things like that. So, and of course, I think the transient lunar phenomena is very interesting when you combine that with the idea that it's ringing. And I don't know if there are other similar things like that I'm not aware of. If you could let me know, I'm fascinated with all that stuff.
Yeah, those are very very good points, and that has been pointed out by quite a few people now. And there's definitely something going on there. There is some activity that you mentioned. Did he mention translunar? What was it he said there?
Yeah, transient lunar phenomenon is it's the NASA catalog that they've been recording for they have a catalog of 500 years of well-documented sightings of these lights on the moon.
Yeah, but there's also been a phenomenon too where you're looking at the moon and then it sort of it distorts. That has been actually videoed as well, where there's a distortion and there's some theory or some speculation that the moon is real, but that they're camouflaging it with technology to hide what's really going on there. So that's another theory that should be looked at as well.
Right. Oh yeah, and the other thing, there's titanium in the soil, or at least aftermath of titanium. I think they found some kind of elements that only occur if there was a bunch of titanium or titanium production or something like that.
Yeah. So, and also, I think it's also we should be careful that NASA has this. It's a tactic. They'll put out a lot of stuff to throw you off from what's really out there. So they love to muddy the water. So. But you're right.
Right.
Nothing about the moon can be discounted right now. It's a whole different. It's a whole new field of science.
Yeah.
Real science.
Thanks for Matt.
All right. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. This is. So can someone like Elon Musk or someone in the private sector, can they send an unmanned their own private thing to the moon if he wanted to?
No, he does what he's told.
This is because of the NASA thing.
Well, I think NASA does what it's told as well. I think that's how many layers there are to this. I just don't take it at face value anymore. Elon Musk, if you were to go with the official narrative, you'd need the might of the resources from the U.S. government in order to make this happen. Elon Musk will never, in my opinion, will get to the moon. He'll come up with some reason as why he can't. Low Earth orbit, doesn't seem to be a problem. He seems to have that capability, not the moon. The moon is off limits.
Okay, we got another call here. Hello, thanks for calling Low Value Mail. Who am I speaking with?
Hey, it's Dylan from Wisconsin.
Dylan from Wisconsin. Dylan from Wisconsin, you're on with Randy. Go ahead.
Hey, what's going on, Randy?
Hello.
So previous caller and you were talking about visual distortions of the moon. I was wondering if you were familiar with they call it the lunar wave. it's been documented by like a handful of amateur like moon watchers, moon gazers, I guess I'll say.
Yes, I am familiar with that. I've looked at that, and I haven't written about it, and I probably won't because that's an area of expertise that's sort of. I'll leave that up to the others.
What is that
to
exactly?
Look into that. It's a wave. There's a wave that goes across the lunar surface. It appears like a wave. It's like a wave in the ocean.
Is it like light,
across.
or is it like actually on the surface?
Yeah. It's a distortion of light that seems to be just one strip going across, and it looks like a hologram. That's what I was alluding to earlier. That there's some speculation that there could be some very interesting exotic technology that's used to put a hologram shield in front of the moon to shield us, or to shield them from what is really going on, or to hide from us rather what is really going on the lunar surface. Again, it's just speculation, it's a theory, but that's one theory as to what that wave is about. It's the hologram breaking down momentarily and then resetting.
So that kind of like, do you think the moon could be a plasma then? Maybe kind of like that there's that old video that floats around of that Professor Foster, and he's saying like, oh, they'll never land on the moon, it's all plasma.
Yeah, I mean, there's again many theories, but what's causing the gravitational pull against the Earth? I mean, there has to be some substance to that moon. So that satellite that's orbiting us, that natural satellite or not so natural satellite, it does affect the ocean. So there is a pull on the Earth. So there's something definitely viable there.
Yeah.
Okay. My wackiest theory. What do you think about the possibility that we may live on a crater inside or on the surface of the moon, inside of a crater?
Wait, we're on a crater inside of the moon?
No, we're on a crater. We're not. The Earth is a crater.
Not inside, on the surface of a moon.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, so it basically what he's saying is, and if correct me if I'm wrong, caller. I think what you're saying is that that what I have looked at is, and what I have come across is that the Earth is basically, our whole society is a crater on a much larger, gigantic planet, and what we see when we look at the moon is a reflection of that.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes into sort of up into a tangent, like a pyramid, and we're seeing a reflection of that of ourselves. That's another theory. It's pretty fascinating, but yeah. Well, there's a lot of interesting.
That one's out there.
Yeah, I love all that stuff, man. It's crazy what could be out there, dude.
Man.
All right, well, thanks for the show. It's been a pleasure listening to you fellas.
Appreciate it.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Yeah, that one. I think maybe when we did the flat Earth episode, I'm not a flat earther or anything, but I think maybe someone called and asked about that one specifically. All right, we're gonna wrap this up very shortly. So, where can actually, before we get into any plugs and stuff, so is there anything else kind of? I know there's one thing that you mentioned actually that I made a note earlier. You said that they went to the South Pole or Antarctica to recover moon rock.
Yeah.
Can you? Yeah. I wrote that down, but then we got past it. But I was like, it's sticking in my head. Can you just elaborate on that further? So there's moon rock in the South Pole.
Yeah. So there is again theory that millions of years ago, when the moon supposedly was going through its upheaval as well as the Earth and the planets in the solar system, and there was a lot of impacts on the surface. And the explosion from the surface would get caught in Earth's gravity and then would fall towards the South Pole or North Pole. So that's the theory behind that. So Werner von Braun, who was the architect of the Saturn V rocket, remember Werner von Braun was brought to United States after World War II from Germany.
Right.
And a little
paperclip. Right?
And just a sidebar here. Jack Parsons, that's come out that Jack Parsons and Werner von Braun had a relationship before World War II, during World War II, and after World War II. So they knew each other. So there's something else going on there too. So that's another show. But so he, Werner von Braun, gathered an entourage, and him and his entourage went down to the South Pole to gather all these moon rocks several months rather, before the first Apollo moon landing, which was Apollo 11. So that's what that was about. Now, what he was doing that for is speculation, but to me, it would seem to fit the theory, which I think is a viable theory, that that's where their actual moon rocks came from, and that's what you see in their labs. And that's why NASA is very careful to screen who it is that analyzes those rocks. You have to be basically part of the club in order to be allowed to analyze those rocks. They're not going to let anybody independent of any government or corporation do it for them.
Oh, okay. And I don't know if it's related because the flat earthers, the flat earth Dave, he had some whole thing about how you're legally not allowed to go to the South Pole.
Yeah, he's right. I'm not into the flat earth theory.
I'm not into it either. I just noticed that one thing where
but he's right on that. He's
Yeah.
right. It's the only area in the world where all nations have agreed to a treaty that they to restrict movements of average people going down to the South Pole. You can go to the North Pole all you like, but the South Pole is off limits. It's very controlled. That tells you something else. They're hiding something down there.
And that's where the Moonrocks were.
Yeah.
Crazy. That's obviously there might be some sort of coincidence. But regardless, that's interesting. So, is there anything else you kind of want to that maybe you didn't get out that you wanted to discuss regarding the moon? I'm sure you have lots of stuff.
We probably touched about maybe 5% of the research. There's a lot
what's a couple things that you can leave people with that you think might interest them before we wrap this up?
Well, I think that Neil Armstrong died 10 years ago, supposedly, and I believe I based my character in my book on Neil Armstrong.
Okay.
And I really do believe that there was that he wasn't living very well with this lie, and that there might have been a possibility that he might have wanted to reveal it. There is a rumor that one astronaut was on his way to reveal it and died of a heart attack before he got to his destination. I don't know who that Apollo astronaut is, but I know Neil Armstrong. There's some questions about what happened to him while he was in having heart surgery. It was supposed to be routine. He was in his early 80s, so it could be just that.
Yeah.
But there are some questions.
Yeah, he was 82 years old.
Yeah.
So, because you say supposedly, when you say supposedly, you're not saying that he's still alive.
No, I'm not saying he's alive. I think he's dead. I think that there's a possibility he might have been helped a little quicker.
Right. Because that would seem like something, if you're at the end of your life, that seems like something sometimes people kind of
just want to get it off your chest. He's tell by his behavior in the last 50 years. Actually, of all the astronauts, the Apollo astronauts, and I don't like a lot of them, but I've always sort of felt a little bit for Neil Armstrong. He seemed to be the one that always stood out. He was quiet. He was a recluse. He only did like 1 or 2 interviews a year. And when he did them, they were very carefully choreographed and controlled.
Yeah.
It was almost as if, I have a theory about that in my new book, and it was almost as if that was his only way out, was to agree to some public appearances. But for the most part, he really backed off. He resigned his commission after the Apollo missions were ended in 1972, and he went into he became a university professor, and basically in terms of public life became a recluse, except for 1 or 2 appearances a year.
Yeah. And what do you think the effects would be, essentially, like if something were to come out that would essentially prove that they didn't go to the moon? Like what do you think the second order effects may be?
I think there's
I
think there's actual footage out there that shows them. The footage would actually show them faking the mission in real time to fool mission control. And again, I get into this in my latest book. I do a fictional account of this. I believe there's actual footage of that. And I think that will eventually come out. I think as we see the breakdown of the central banking system, there's not going to be the resources and money to pay people to keep the secret. So I think you'll see them coming forward. People who are directly or indirectly now, I guess, because it's been 50 years involved in the Apollo program, will start coming forward. I've received a few emails from people who were indirectly involved with companies that had some involvement in the Apollo program, and they said that from the sources that they've talked to, the whole thing was rigged from the very beginning. They knew it was fake. So I think that information is going to come out.
So there's people alive right now who not only know that it was faked, but actually have evidence of it.
Yeah.
And do you think there's governments like the United States government? Because it seems like if they're destroying all this stuff, obviously they're destroying it because they needed some sort of deniability as to why they couldn't do it.
Well, isn't it interesting that 5 years ago, 6 years ago, Trump threw down a gauntlet with NASA and said you have till 2024 to land another man on the moon, knowing that they weren't going to be able to do it.
Right.
You can read into that what people can read into that what they want, but it seems to me that he was throwing down the gauntlet with NASA, and I think that was a form of disclosure, in my opinion, because we all predicted. I'm not the only one. We all predicted it was going to be pushed back, and that's exactly what happened, as we talked about earlier.
And what's their budget right now?
NASA. See, this is the other thing. NASA, I believe, they were getting about equivalent to $40 or $50 million a year during the Apollo program. My understanding is they're still getting half that, $20 billion a year.
Sorry. You said million. They were getting 40 to 50 million? Billion. Yeah. Billion in today's dollars during Apollo.
Yeah. The Apollo missions, untold, cost about $250 billion in today's value.
Right.
When you,
which is even crazier when you think that they spent all that money and then you go and you just threw out all the stuff.
Well, the question is, what are they spending that money on? And that would be, for me, that's the real thing. And today they're still getting $20 billion a year. So what are they doing with that money? How come they haven't put the resources back into their manned space program? They couldn't do since they retired Space Shuttle, they still don't have a viable spaceship of their own to low Earth orbit, let alone a ship to the moon and back. They're still relying on either Elon Musk or they're relying on the Russian space program to do it for them. And within 8 years, they haven't been able to duplicate anything. They can't duplicate one mission in 10 years compared to the
50 years later
plus missions. Yeah, 50 years later.
Yeah, it's like on top of
exactly. Yeah. They can't duplicate anything they did in the last 50 years. They haven't even come close.
It's wild. It's wild. Do you think there's some sort of kind of funny business where that money's going?
Oh yeah. I mean, to me, it's obvious it's going to Black Ops, and it's maybe there's another theory out there. I love these theories because it does get you thinking. Just keep your feet on the ground. Yep. Stay grounded. That there's a breakaway civilization. So we don't know. With technology that is far advanced. I mean, it's no secret the military has technology we know of that's at least 30, 40 years ahead of what we have today. They already have this technology. Who knows what's beyond that? I think they have technology that's even far more exotic than that. And as a theory that this money could be funneled into those projects for breakaway civilizations, where those breakaway civilizations is anyone's guess. It could be on this planet, it could be off planet. It's another book for another day.
Right. Okay. That has been a fun time. I've enjoyed this very much. Let people know where's the best place they can find you to keep up with all your work.
You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on my. I have all the contact information is in my books for people who would. Or you can contact me at author Randy Walsh. That's Facebook.
Okay.
Or you can send me an email at authorrandy@hotmail.com. That's Randy, author Randy with 2 R's in the middle.
I'll put everything underneath too. So if anybody has anything, and they can get a hold of you. All right, very good. And you can. I'll put the links for your books on Amazon. They're selling pretty well.
They're doing pretty. I'm actually quite happy as an independent author. My books I don't know if I just made the right connections.
Because when I was searching for on Amazon for guests, and I believe your book was in this category was like the top book.
Yeah, it's done really well. So I've had publishing companies calling me. They want to, but I'm not no fee up front, fellas. All right, if you believe in this book, then and I have to be honest with you. I'm not getting wealthy. This isn't about the money. It was something you said earlier. I've got a passion for this. I just want to truth out. If I didn't make any money on this, I could still do this.
Right.
I'm passionate about the truth and getting the truth out as best I can. I just want to make a contribution.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining the show. Don't forget, tomorrow, new episode of the Bathhouse Live at 10:30 p.m. We will be back. And as mentioned, you can catch, if you missed this live stream or you're catching it, it'll be up on Thursday afternoon or morning or whatever. Anyways, thank you very much, Randy Walsh. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely evening.
my shit heroic. Empathic abilities, yeah, my face be also stoic. Bleep blow up, nigga, that just means I'm working. They see me as a leader, so that's why I'm Captain Kirkin. These tracks from the stars, that much is for certain. You can feel this hit if you up or if you hurt. I'm raising my stock, not talking my feet in some Birkin. Number Johnny 5 got a fucking short circuit. Bring the track to life when I spit phenomenal. When I hit, she feel that shit in her abdominals. These rappers make me laugh like comic view, they comically. You know I got a ball out, I hit the track running just like Sonic do. They don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah, they was trying to get me on my hype shit. Yeah, they don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah, and they tried to down me on some KO type shit. Yeah, they don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah, now we pulling up fresh on some flight shit. Ha. They don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah, they don't wanna turn on my light switch. They don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah, they was trying to get me on my hype shit. Yeah, they don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah, then they tried to down me on some KO type shit. Yeah, they don't wanna turn on my light switch. Yeah.